All right, time to dive into some serious data manipulation with PDO. We're going to be focusing on how to delete records safely, effectively, like a pro. And we've got our trusty guide right here from plus2net.com. They always have some really practical examples, especially when it comes to using PDO with MySQL.
And it's important to remember, even if you're just messing around in a testing environment, you got to be careful when deleting data.
Oh, absolutely. One little slip up and poof, gone. Data
Mhm.
vanished. So, no playing fast and loose. We got to be precise about this. What's the first thing we need to understand?
Well, plus 2net starts off with the fundamental PDO delete query structure, which makes sense, right? Got to have that solid base. But here's the thing. Even though the basic syntax is pretty straightforward, there's a critical element that's going to make sure you're deleting the right stuff, the where clause.
Ah, the where clause, right. It's like having a metal detector when you're trying to find that specific lost treasure buried in a sandbox. No more digging around blindly. But how does it work, though, with PDO? Anything specific we need to keep in mind?
Spot on. That's a great analogy. And with PDO, there's actually a way to really level up your security game here. It's called the bind param method.
Bind param. Okay,
Mhm.
sounds kind of technical, but I'm intrigued. What's so special about it?
So it's not just about writing cleaner code, although that's always a bonus. It's about protecting yourself from those nasty SQL injection attacks. You don't want one of those messing up your database.
Okay, hold on. SQL injection attacks. Now that sounds serious. What exactly are we talking about here?
So picture this, some sneaky code gets into your delete query, maybe through a user input form, right? And this code, it's designed to bypass your where clause entirely. Basically, it can wreak havoc on your entire database if you're not careful.
Ouch, yeah. Definitely not what we want. So this bind param thing, it's like our bodyguard against these SQL injection shenanigans.
You got it. Think of it as telling PDO, hey, treat these values like plain old data, not some executable code that's going to blow things up. Simple step, but a powerful layer of protection.
Okay, that's a relief. It's good to know PDO has our back with these built-in security features. But even with the most secure delete query, there's always this little voice in my head that goes, did it actually work?
Right, and that's where the trusty row count method swoops in to save the day. Think of it as getting that delivery confirmation for your deleted data.
So it's not just about hitting the delete button, but actually making sure it happened, like for real.
Exactly. Row count, it tells you how many rows were actually affected by your delete query. Deleted one record, row count, gives you back a 1. You're golden. But if you get a 0, well, then you know something's up and you need to investigate.
That's pretty handy. Like a built-in double-check system for deletions. And what's cool is that Plus2Net mentions row count
Mhm.
isn't just for deletions, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely not a one-trick pony. Think of row count as a Swiss Army knife for your coding toolkit. Adding, updating, deleting, it doesn't matter. Row count is there to give you that feedback on whether the operation was actually successful.
Makes sense. I mean, knowing how many rows were affected by any operation, that's got to be valuable information, especially when you're trying to track down some weird bug. Now, let's talk about making these deletions even safer. And for that, we need to talk about transactions. What are they, and why should we care about them when we're talking about something as, well, as permanent as deleting data?
Okay, so imagine this. You're working on some critical database updates. Maybe you're deleting a bunch of outdated customer info, adding new entries, the whole shebang. And then, bam, server hiccups or your internet connection decides to take a nosedive. What happens to your database?
Oh man, I know that feeling.
Yeah.
Mid-operation crashes are the worst. It's
Yeah.
like the universe just loves to mess with your data. So transactions, they're like our safety net for these kind of situations.
You got it. Transactions, they're like a safety net for your database operations. Think of it this way. You're grouping a bunch of SQL statements into a single unit of work. Either all of them get executed successfully or none of them do. No more half-baked updates or deletions messing up your data.
Ah, so it's like an all or nothing approach. I like it. Keeps things clean. But how do we actually make these transactions happen with PDO?
Well, the way it works is pretty elegant, actually. We have 3 main methods: begin transaction, commit, and rollback.
Okay, let's break those down. What's each one doing?
Sure. So begin transaction. That's like sending a signal to your database. You're basically saying, hey, get ready. I'm about to make some changes over here. Then you've got your delete statements all lined up, where clauses in place, bind param for security, the whole 9 yards. And if everything goes smoothly, we use commit to make those changes stick, like putting a stamp on it and saying done deal.
I'm digging this. It's like having that safety switch for our database operations. But you mentioned rollback. When does that come into play?
Ah, rollback. That's our trusty undo button. Something goes wrong during our transaction. Maybe the server throws a tantrum, your internet connection goes ahead again, or even if your own code decides to act up, you hit that rollback and boom, it's like rewinding time. The database goes right back to how it was before you started the transaction. No harm done.
It's like having a time machine for your data. That's incredibly powerful. It seems like transactions provide that safety net, that peace of mind when you're dealing with these critical tasks, especially deletions.
They really do. But even with the best laid plans, sometimes things just don't go our way. Code can be unpredictable, and so can databases.
Preach. I've lost count of how many hours I've spent staring at error messages, trying to decipher what went wrong. It's like trying to solve a mystery with only half the clues. Speaking of troubleshooting, Plus 2Net talks about handling those dreaded errors during PDO deletions, specifically. Is there anything different about error handling in this context?
It's all about having the right tools to understand those cryptic messages that databases sometimes throw at us, right? Luckily, PDO has this built-in method called error info.
Error info. That rings a ball, but I'll admit, I haven't really taken it out for a spin. How can it help us with these deletion issues, though?
So let's say you've written a perfectly valid delete query. Everything looks good, but for some reason, it's just not deleting the right records. Instead of going down that rabbit hole of confusion, you can just call on error info to shed some light on the situation.
So we're essentially asking the database, hey, what gives? Why isn't this working the way it's supposed to?
Exactly. Error info gives you this nice, standardized way to get those error details directly from the source, the database driver. You'll get an array with all the juicy details about that last error, including an error message you can actually understand and an error code specific to, whatever database system you're using. No more vague error and query messages that leave you scratching your head.
Right, it's like finally an error message that speaks our language. It's got to be helpful. But what about this PDO.emulate prepares thing that Plus QNet mentioned? That sounds a bit intimidating, to be honest. What's the deal with that, and how does it tie into all of this error handling stuff?
Okay, so PDO.emulate prepares. It does sound a bit like some kind of secret setting, right? Like something only the PDO wizards know about. What's the story with this thing, and why should we even care? Especially when we're trying to wrangle these database errors.
You're right, it's a bit of a mouthful. Basically, this attribute, it's all about how PDO handles those prepared statements behind the scenes. You see, it determines whether PDO sends like a single query to the database with placeholders for the values, or if it does some pre-processing on those values before sending the whole thing off. Okay, I vaguely remember prepared statements from MySQL days. They're supposed to make things faster and more secure, right? Like optimizing those database calls.
You got it. And they actually play a key role in getting those accurate error messages, believe it or not. When PDO.emulate prepares is set to true, which is the default in some setups, PDO actually handles some of that statement preparation itself. Sounds convenient, right? But sometimes it can lead to the database driver giving you less helpful error messages.
So it's like playing a game of telephone with our errors. The message gets a little garbled along the way.
Exactly. Now, if we switch that setting to false, we're essentially telling PDO, hey, let the database handle all the preparation work. And often that results in more accurate, more informative error messages because the database driver is directly involved.
Gotcha. So we're giving the database a bit more control up front, and in return, we get more precise feedback when something goes wrong. It's a win-win.
Precisely. Think of it as fine-tuning your debugging toolkit. And trust me, every little bit helps when you're knee-deep in code.
Absolutely. Now, switching gears a bit, there's this other thing from Plus 2Net I wanted to ask you about, truncate. They talk about it as a way to, completely empty a table, delete all the records. Seems almost too easy, though. Is there more to it than meets the eye?
There's always more to it, right? While both truncate and delete can empty a table, they go about it in totally different ways. Think of it this way. Delete. Without a where clause, it goes through each row one by one and removes them carefully, like meticulously erasing each line on a whiteboard.
Okay, can picture that.
Truncate, on the other hand, is like grabbing that whiteboard and wiping it clean with one swift motion.
So it's all about speed and efficiency then.
You got it. If you need to clear a large table quickly, truncate is definitely the way to go. It's way faster than delete, especially for those massive data sets. But here's the catch. Truncate is what's called a DDL command, that's data definition language, whereas delete, that's DML data manipulation language.
Okay, I'm sensing a bug coming here. What's the difference and why does it matter?
Good ear. So DDL commands like truncate, they work on the structure of the table itself, while DML commands like delete They're all about the data inside the table.
So it's like the difference between renovating your entire house versus just rearranging the furniture inside.
Exactly, and that little difference has some important implications, like because Truncate is messing with the table structure, it resets any auto-incrementing IDs back to their starting point.
That explains why my IDs always start over after I use Truncate. I thought my database was just messing with me.
It's come an aha moment, and it just goes to show it pays to know what's happening under the hood with these SQL commands.
You got that right.
Yeah.
Wow, we've covered a ton of ground in this deep dive. From those nitty-gritty where clauses to why binding parameters is so crucial, and even the power of transactions. Not to mention those super valuable debugging techniques with row count and error info. And hey, we even learned how a little tweak like that PDO.atree emulate prepares setting can make all the difference.
Absolutely. It's all about those little details, right? And remember, deleting data, it's a big deal. So always double check that code. Make sure you've got backups just in case. And hey, when in doubt, don't be afraid to consult the documentation or phone a friend, another developer who's been there.
Words to code by. And on that note, it's time to wrap up our PDO deletion deep dive. Hopefully you're feeling prepared to tackle your next data deletion task with confidence and precision. And hey, maybe even a little bit of swagger.
Happy coding, everyone.